Well, hey y'all. Welcome to another DCO Live. Brian, great for you to join us tonight. Nice to see you, man. It's been a while. Hope you're doing well. Let me know if you've been out fishing. Brian and I, we actually kind of go way back in the start. Man, when I started this channel, Brian actually won one of my first giveaways. I think it was some bass lures or something along that. Man, that's going back a long time. You're one of my OGs subscribers. So Brian, good to see you, man. Good to see you. But before we get started tonight, if there's a way that you guys would like to support the channel, you guys can pick up a Deadcom hat. They are a Richardson 112 hat with a custom patch and a custom logo. I actually got together with a local artist and he did the design for the logo. So this is just a short run of hats. I think I may only have, looking back there at my box, maybe only like 20 left. So I appreciate the guys who have been picking them up. If you want a hat, just message me on Facebook or Instagram and hook up with me, and then we'll go that way. So, Russell, great to see you tonight. I appreciate you joining us. Um, Last week, I had my first guest on. John with Fishful Thinking was on. And I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. There was a few little bugs that I still have to work out. It was nice of John to kind of be my guinea pig. We had some technical difficulty before we started. I had some camera issues. They weren't connecting. And then during the live chat, my screen was really small. I found the setting a day or two after the live chat, and now I know how to make my screen bigger so you guys can see me a little bit better. So it's those learning curves, and I appreciate you guys just, hanging with me to work out the bugs. But next week, I have another guest on. It is Kerry Browning, and Kerry is with Release Over 20. He is one of the board of directors, and he is actually the director of the sponsors. So every month when they do their giveaways of all their sponsor gifts like hats and shirts and fishing lures, Kerry is responsible for putting all of that together. He is heavily involved in Release Over 20, obviously, with him being on the board. I fished with Kerry about a year, probably almost pushing a year and a half now. We've always kept in contact. Kerry is a great guy, so we're going to be talking fish conservation, Release Over 20, and maybe even some trout fishing and some redfish. So Kerry's a great fisherman. He put us on the fish that day, and he's a great guy. I think you guys will highly enjoy hanging out with Kerry. So bring your questions for Kerry next week so that we can keep him hopping and talk a little bit of fish conservation, which I know is a very hot topic right now, especially what's going on in North Carolina with them shutting down the flounder season altogether. So, fish conservation is usually right on the forefront of everybody's mind, especially for us outdoorsmen and anglers. How much can we harvest without hurting our fisheries? Let's really dive into this next week and see if we can't, shed some light on a few things. But tonight, I wanted to dive into tide charts. I had somebody leave me a comment about 2 weeks ago, and he said, Chris, I just moved down here. I can't remember now, but he wasn't from the coastal area. But he wanted to know about tide charts and how to read tide charts. He he doesn't know anything about it, so I thought, what a great topic to just kind of dive into and see, get your guys' experience with it. I can throw in my insight. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to dive right into it tonight. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so you guys can see this. So I have a tide chart here, and this was from July 21st. And I brought up Google Earth of Murrells Inlet. So we're going to kind of use these two examples. One, how to kind of read the tide chart, and then apply the tide chart to when you go out fishing. And I just pulled Murrells Inlet. I've got it pinned on my Google Earth, so it was real easy to bring up, and we can talk some scenarios. Again, guys, this is a live chat. If you have questions, comments, whatever, throw them in the chat box and I will get to them. And so, yeah, you guys throw them out there and I will get to them as I see them. So let's talk about the tide chart here first. Being in North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, I'm not sure about Florida or even North, Virginia. I'm not sure about Florida and Virginia. But when you're talking like the mid-Atlantic states, South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, it has 2 highs and 2 lows in a 24-hour period. It's called a diurnal flow. So there's 2 lows, 1 here, 2 highs, 1 here and 1 here. So it happens twice in a 24-hour period. Now, when I'm going out, I like to fish the tops of the tides or the bottoms of the tides. And that is because the current is at its, I'm going to say, the slowest. When you start getting into this middle section of the tide chart, the current is really pumping and we're getting a lot of water flushing into the estuary. The best example that I heard explaining the tide and the current is this gentleman, and he was a guide down in Charleston. I cannot remember his name, or I would give him credit for the reference, but think of it as a train trying to get moving. So when you're at the top of the tide or the slack tide, that slack tide is when the water is not moving. So you're in between the incoming and the outgoing. That slack tide usually lasts somewhere between, I'm going to say 30 and 50 minutes, depending on where you're at. And then it starts to move again, okay? So when it starts to move, that current, as it's moving out, is going really slow. So that train is just starting to take off. It's just starting to move. It's not moving very quickly. And then as picks up speed, and then when you hit the middle of this tide, that current is moving. That train is at its highest speed and it is rolling. I mean, all of this water from the inlet right here is just coming in like gangbusters. And then it starts to slow down, and then you hit the bottom of the tide and you get another slack tide. And then it stops, and then that train has to start moving real slow again and takes back off. So how do we apply this tide chart to where we're going to be fishing? So if we take, let's just take the bottom of this tide here. If we take the bottom of this tide, that current isn't moving very much. We still have some current, which the fish like, and that's when they're going to be feeding, is when there's some current movement. So this is what I like to fish, is these slower current times of the tide. So I can pretty much fish anywhere in here and not really worry about one being pushed around by the current in my kayak very much. The bait fish are going to be a little more free to kind of roam in these bigger areas. I'm going to kind of pull in right here just because it's there. The bait fish can just kind of roam around and kind of spread out in these areas instead of being bunched up in little protected areas. And that's when I like to fish, okay? That's when I start getting into the flat areas on high tide, because the flats, there's not going to be moving very much, so I like to get up into the flats. And during the low tides, These creeks is everything is going to be concentrated into these creeks. So the time that I really have to watch where I fish is during the middle of the tide when that current is at its highest. I still fish it, but you have to be aware of where you're fishing. So if I come back over here to the map, if you see my big cursor right here, if the water's coming in this way, it's going to come in and just kind of follow the cursor. It's going to come right along this bank, this current. It's going to sweep along here, and you see this point? This current is going to hit this bank here and then come around this side. So it's going to come here, hit this bank, and kind of come around. So on this side of the point, there's going to be a little eddy formed right there. And that's where I'm going to be fishing, is this area. There's still going to be plenty of current coming in, so these fish are going to be feeding, but they're going to be setting in these eddy areas because the fish are not going to set in high current, expend all of this energy, burn all of these calories to set in these high current areas and try to feed. They're going to have to be kicking their tails and working way too hard to stay in this current and feed. They're going to be around these eddy points and wait for bait to get flushed around these points, and they're going to be feeding. So I'll set up over here and fish these eddy areas. So again, you can look at them everywhere. So let's look at this second creek. So as the tide comes in here, it's going to split off here and it's going to hit this bank and then bounce off into here. So this inside corner right here is going to be the eddy area. So you can pull in right here. You can fish this spot all along in here because there's not going to be as much current because the current's going to hit here. It's going to hit this outside edge and then move down into this creek. Okay, so that's on an incoming tide when all this water is coming in and pushing into the estuary. So on the reverse, when the tide is dropping out and moving back out towards the inlet, the reverse is going to be true. So let's look at this point again. So as the water is flushing out of this flat here, it's going to flush out of here, it's going to hit this bank and then move around. So now this side is going to be your eddy side, okay? And so you can sit here, fish up towards this point and be good. Again, on this side, you can sit here and fish up into here because this current's going to hit here and then bounce over and hit this side and roll out this way. So this whole inside area will almost be like an eddy and not a lot of current in that area. So those are the areas I'm going to be looking at. And again, as you take this creek over here, as the tide is dropping out, it's going to come along this side here and come out. So this side right in here is going to be your eddy side. And you can look at those on any creeks, no matter where you go. You can look at those and pick out these eddy areas. So if we go down, let's just take another real quick example. Here's Polly's. Let's take a look at this real quick. And again, you can take a look at Polly's. So on an incoming tide, excuse me. Cheers, guys. On an incoming tide, all of this water is going to come in. It's going to slam against here and then push all the way around this side here. So this is going to be your eddy side on an incoming tide. On an outgoing tide, all this water is going to slam up against here, kind of dissipate out into here, okay? And then this in here is going to be your eddy or calmer side. So you can take that anywhere, even to these creeks, You just have to think of how this water is going to move around and pick out those eddies during this middle part of the tide when that water is just rushing in. And then as it slows down towards the bottom of the tide, or as it slows down towards the top of the tide, then you can kind of come out, hit these deeper holes, hit these areas. There'll still be some current there. The fish will still be feeding, but you won't have that real strong current. And these fish are going to be kind of moving and almost kind of repositioning themselves for the turn of the tide. So, guys, I hope that kind of sheds a little bit of light on the tide charts and and how to work the currents in a creek when you go out scouting before you head out to the water. Now, there is a couple of things that does affect the tides. I have heard a lot of guys for a long time like, you know what, I thought the high tide was going to be at 12 o'clock. Well, it was, it wasn't high tide until 12:30. Well, there's a couple of things that can affect that timing of the tide, okay? One is wind. Um, Wind, so if the tide is coming in Murrells Inlet, coming in from the east, but we have a strong wind blowing from the west, it's actually going to slow that water being pushed in. So if high tide's supposed to be at noon, it may not be until 12:15. It may slow things down. On the opposite end, if the tide is coming in with an east wind blowing it in, high tide may be at 11:45, 11:40. So you may get high tide earlier because it's just being shoved into the inlet quicker. So one thing to keep in mind is, how is the wind going to affect the water being pushed in? So think about that also. Another thing you have to think about is where you're getting your tide information. There are several tide markers inside of Murrells Inlet. I use one over here in Austin Creek, and I use this one over here because I launch out of the Oyster Recycling Center. But there's one kind of up by Judy Boone's, which is somewhere right around in here. Smith Dock is up here. They have one. So another thing that you have to keep in mind, if your conditions are perfect, and I'm doing this tide chart right here, okay, this tide chart is going to be spot on. So if it says the high tide is going to be 12 o'clock, high tide is going to be 12 o'clock at this tide chart right here. Now, if you are fishing in Weston Flats up here, but you're using this tide chart here, your high tide may be 11:50 because the water is going to hit here before it hits here. Conversely, if you're fishing down here towards the state park and using this tide information, you are going to be even later yet. It may be 12:15 or 12:20 before high tide because the water is going to hit here first before it hits here. So another thing to keep in mind is, what tide marker are you getting your information from, and how close are you to that tide marker? So a couple of things just to kind of keep in mind when you're looking at these tide charts. So guys, I hope that helps you out. If you got any questions, throw them down into the chat box. Let me know what your experience has been, or if you have any other questions, or maybe if you want to look at a certain area, I can pull up Google Earth real quick and we can take a look at an area. So the next thing I wanted to go over is some on the water footage. So I was down in Charleston last weekend. I did a tournament and I was in Sullivan's Island. And on that day, it was a beautiful, beautiful day. It was an outgoing tide. And right out here is one of the main creeks or almost rivers on the other side of this dock. And the tide was just starting to get ripping. So I wanted to work some docks to kind of get out of that current because this structure right here will really block that current. And as you can see here, I am almost in still water. So that day the water was stained. You can almost kind of see it. That's Charleston fishing. It's stained water. And I was using the Z-Man spinnerbait, and I put on a beer run little 3-inch diesel minnow because I was seeing a lot of bait fish in that area. Before I got to this dock, I was up in a creek and I was seeing a lot of menhaden, and they were all about that size. Menhaden, they're white, they're silvery color. So I threw this on, and I threw on the spinner because of the stained and murky water to give it just a little bit of flash. So when I started throwing this, I got behind this dock right here. And again, you can see how still the water is, but just on the other side of this dock is that main river, that main creek, and there was a ton of current going out that way. I am most successful with my redfish in 1 to 3 feet of water. And I was in 1.5 feet of water right back here. So I am actually going to pause my on the water footage here real quick because SJ Workman 42 said the south end of Pawleys. So yeah, you want me to check out the south end of Pawleys as far as the tide charts go? I can do that. So guys, let me pull this real quick and let's take a look at that real fast. So here's, yeah, here we go. So here's the south end of Pawleys, and I am going to assume you're going to be talking about Pritchard Landing right here. So here is the inlet to the south end of Pawleys. It's way down here, and it's got to travel all the way up this river before it hits to the south end. So when I have fished the south end of Pawleys, I've put in here at Pritchard, and when that water is coming in, it is ripping. And I mean, this creek right here, you can get a hell of a current that's pushing through here and pushing up through here because all of that water is almost concentrated in a funnel coming into Pawleys, and then it's finally hitting here. So as this water is coming in, it's going to disperse, it's going to come around here, and it's going to come out here nice and wide until it hits here, and it's going to bounce off. So this inside area, almost down these first 3 docks right here from the landing, this is going to be your kind of your eddy area right here, okay? Same thing is going to be right here. As this water pushes in, it's actually going to hit about where this dock is and then push around. So this little inside area is going to be your current eddy. And as it hits and comes around, it's going to be funneled back in through here. And once it hits this bend, it's going to hit here, bounce off, stay on the outside, and then come in. So this area on the inside on an incoming current is going to be your eddy area. On the opposite end, as it's coming out of this main creek, it's going to be dumping out and hitting here and then working kind of in and then coming back around this side. So this area right in here is going to be your eddy area. Okay, and this area is going to be your eddy area because it's going to come in and disperse, and it's also going to disperse here and hit here. So this would probably be a really good area to fish right in through here, all around this little island area around this dock, and these points would probably be really good on the ingoing and outgoing tides. So SJ working, I hope that answers your question. If not, throw it back down there. I am going to, if I can stop that, let's go back to my on the water here. So I'm in about 1.5 feet of water, and I'm working these docks right up in here. So I am just throwing out that spinner bait, and I'm jigging this spinner bait, but I'm not moving it very much off the bottom. I can feel that spinner, and so right there, you can see I threw my bait almost on that piling. These redfish are going to hold to structure very, very closely. So as I work this dock, I actually worked this little floating dock and kind of worked my way back until I made this cast that was right there on that piling. And again, you can kind of see I just did a couple of little jigs, jig, jig, and bang, he hit it. So you can see the drag starts kind of pulling out, and I'm pedaling backwards so that I'm not getting pulled into his boat, the dock, or anything like that. But I wasn't, I was not in control at this point. I cut to the end. He finally was giving up. It was about a minute to a minute and a half fight, and it would ended up being a 25.25-inch redfish. And so he was a really nice red to start the day. It was probably about 8:30 or so, 9 o'clock, and a really nice red to start my day. But again, that 1.5 feet of water was key. That's where I like to hunt my reds, from 1 to 3 feet of water. And again, he was right on the structure, and popping that little spinner bait was where I had him. So then a day or so later, I was back in Merle's Inlet, and I did a little bit of flounder fishing. So I'm going to stop right here. I was using a Z-Man diesel minnow, and it's in sexy penny color. So it was new penny on the top, so kind of a copper color on the top with some chartreuse on the bottom. And it was a Texas eye, a 3/16 Texas eye. You can't really see it, but right here, there's a little bitty creek drain. You can kind of see it. And that's where I made my cast, just on kind of that creek mouth right outside. And that's where this flounder was sitting. I love targeting flounder on creek mouths. Let me see, I'm trying to think. It was actually an incoming tide. So there was water being pushed into that little creek, and so there would have been bait moving back in there. There would have been some activity, and that's where he was sitting, and ended up picking up a really nice flounder here. If we can give it a second, and there he is. So he ended up 19 inches. That's the fish that I actually posted on Instagram this afternoon, because I forgot to post him. But again, just a great fish. Caught him right at that creek mouth. You can kind of barely see right there. But that's where I love targeting flounder, right along grass lines, creek mouths. If you are seeing bait, any type of activity, then that's where I am usually fishing, is right there. Matter of fact, the second redfish that I caught during the tournament, I should have put that on the on this video. there was a long stretch of oyster. It was almost long tide, an oyster bank, and there were 4 or 5 great white herons feeding along that bank. So I started cruising down there and I started to see a ton of bait fish along that oyster bed. And I started to work it and I picked up an 18.5 inch red along that oyster bank. So where those birds are, there's usually fish. Those birds are there for a reason. They are feeding on bait. There was a ton of shrimp. There was some menhaden and some mullet flopping around there. So I stuck with it and I ended up picking up an 18 and a half. And when I made the corner, I picked up 2 more small redfish, and they were underslot. They were like 12 to 13 inches a piece, but the pattern stayed the same. They were along the oyster bed in a little eddy area at about 1.5 foot of water with a bunch of bait. And that little 3-inch beer run from Z-Man was matching it perfect, was absolutely perfect. So that was, fantastic. Hey, Captain Bob. Captain Bob is on. Congratulations on your first saltwater tourney win. Hey, I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you. So, yeah, so this redfish that I caught, guys, you can see that here's the measuring board, and that's my identifier. Yes, I was in a redfish tournament, and I ended up winning that tournament by 1/4 of an inch. I had 43.75. The guy in second place had 43.5. So, you know what? I don't know what to say, but it was a fun day out on the water. Just kind of capped off with the win. When I've been in several of these tournaments, and I'm not a leaderboard watcher. I kind of put way too much pressure on myself if I'm watching the leaderboard. So I try not to do it. I'll check it once or twice, but I'll do it early to see if people are catching fish. So if I'm struggling and I'm on a tournament and I can't catch fish, and I'll pop on to see if other people are catching fish. And then if they're not, then maybe it's just going to be a rough day and a grind. But if other people are posting, then I kind of get into my mind and start saying, oh man, I've got to switch something up. Maybe I need to go someplace else. Maybe I need to change my tactics. So, I try not to look at the leaderboard too much, especially late in the day. But no, Captain Bob, I appreciate that. Russell, thank you. Appreciate it. It was definitely fun. It was a fun day. So yeah, catching him was really the kicker, because I think, no, wait, I'm sorry. I'm thinking back. The gentleman in second place, his redfish was 18.25. My second red was 18.5. So that was my kicker. So, yeah, that was a great day. Thank you. So, guys, if you have any other questions, throw them up on there. And I want to give Captain Bob a shout out. So on Saturday mornings on Carolina Gold Radio, he's got a show called On the Hook with Captain Bob. So go and check him out. Last weekend, he had David Fladd from Release Over 20 on, talking about Release Over 20. And Captain Bob, while you're on, you guys talked about maybe not catching redfish during August because of the big bulls out like spawning and doing their thing out there in the water, and trying to look for a motto. You may want to look at no harvest in August. So I thought about that the other day. I don't know if that'll work or not, but I'm actually, just to recap, next week I've got another guest on. I've worked out some more of the bugs, and it's Carrie Browning with Release Over 20. So he is their sponsorship director and on the board. So I've known Carrie now for a couple of years. I went fishing with him about 1.5 years ago down in Charleston, and he put me on some good fish. And he's a great guy. He's actually in Missouri this week playing some golf and enjoying some time in the Midwest. And he's going to join next week, and we're going to talk fish conservation and probably some trout and redfish and kind of see what's going on down there in Charleston. But again, conservation right now is such a hot topic. So, I want to try to stay on what's hot for you guys so that we can just open up some dialogue and start talking about, what we can do to protect our fisheries. There are so many people moving down here to the Carolinas that the pressure in these fisheries right now are starting to become very high. The harvest rates are starting to skyrocket. So, anything that we can do as individual anglers to help protect our fisheries, the better. I am all about catching and eating fish. I love fish. My motto is conservation starts with you. Release a fish for somebody else to enjoy. That's on my YouTube page. And so, if you catch that fish and harvest it, then you're the only one that can enjoy that fish. But if you release it back, then, maybe one, two, three, four other people can enjoy hooking in and having the fight and enjoying that fish. So, guys, I appreciate each and every one of you for jumping on. If there's any guests or anything that you guys want to see in the future, let me know. Shoot me a message on Instagram, Facebook. And again, if you're looking for a way to support the channel, pick up a Deadcom hat. They're great Richardson 112 hats. I love them. Like I said, I've only got, I think maybe only about 20 more, and I'm not doing this style or this patch in this hat ever again. So this is a limited one-time run. If you guys would like to support the channel, I really appreciate it. And guys, I appreciate each and every one of you. I will see you guys next week when we talk to Carrie Browning from Release Over 20. Thanks, guys. Have a great night.